Great, thanks everybody. I think we've had a very busy morning. We're going to talk about what we've characterized as multilateral perspectives. We might describe this as DFI and donor perspectives and partner perspectives on Ukraine's economic transformation. I'm really grateful that Deputy Minister Kuzio is with us. You were recently named. One of your areas of focus is working with DFI. So if there are representatives of embassies here, or representative of aid agencies here, or DFIs here, I hope you are going to introduce yourself to the Deputy Minister and say hello to him, because he'll want to speak with you. So, okay, great. Then we have Mr. Matteo Petrone, who is a Managing Director for Eastern Europe and the Caucasus. He is Mr. Ukraine for the EBRD, or, you know, I think he thinks about Ukraine on a, if you don't know the EBRD, you need to know the EBRD. It's the most important DFI regionally for the, it's not a great way to describe it, but basically the post-Soviet space. And I think they're doing really amazing and important things in Ukraine. And they were working in Ukraine before Ukraine was cool, right? So it's something else to think about. Then I'm really grateful to Rana Karadze to being with us. Thank you. Did I get it? Okay, thank you. I put some thought into that. The last time I saw, so this is like such a, my kid talks about like flex. This is a flex, right? This is what the young kids say. The last time I saw Rana was in Kiev when we had a signing ceremony with President Zelensky. So nice to see you again, Rana, right? So it's good to see you. So you're the Region Director for Europe at the International Finance Corporation. I think I don't need to explain to this group what the International Finance Corporation is. They're the private sector arm of the World Bank Group, and they're also doing many important things with Ukraine and have been working in Ukraine for many, many years. So thanks, Rana, for being here. And then we're really pleased to have a representative from the White House, Christina Siegel-Knowles. Thank you very much for being here. You're a special assistant to the president and senior director for international economics at the White House. So she's very busy, and so we're really grateful she took time out of her very busy schedule to be with us today. Thank you, Christina, for being here. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to give the Deputy Minister a chance to just reflect a little bit on, as you think about your job and you think about reconstruction, how are you engaging with the DFIs? What do you need from donor partners like the United States? I just published 2 hours ago an op-ed in Newsweek saying it'd be a colossally dumb idea and a bad idea if the U.S. were to somehow withdraw assistance. There's a debate in the Congress about whether we should provide assistance. I fall on the side of heck yes, we need to continue to do that. So, Deputy Minister, let me turn the floor over to you to first kind of provide some reflections.
Thank you so much, Dan. And for passing the floor and for such a great conference. Well, we see many friends of Ukraine and many partners, existing partners, and those with whom we will be working down the road. We in the Ministry of Economy are focused mostly on the private sector support and private sector development. According to RDNA, World Bank report, just direct damages for industries and for the infrastructure is around $70 billion. But even more indirectly, losses in revenues for private sectors and additional expenses, around $195 billion, which is huge. And without the strong support from the multilaterals, donors, especially U.S. government and U.S. institutions like IFC, like MIGA, and others, it would be very hard to support the economic growth in Ukraine, because last year the GDP dropped down and shrunk by 30%, which means, in other words, that we must grow in Ukraine in double digits just to achieve the pre-war GDP level. So in this regard, what we have as for now in macro conditions. Inflation rate is reducing, and we now have like 11.3%. Following this, the National Bank of Ukraine reduced the key policy ratio to 20%. We in the Ministry of Economy expect to have 4% growth until at the end of this year. But anyway, the private sectors remain with high risks, and starting from the access to finance, bankable collaterals, then the investment risks, which is needs for risk insurance again. We are now working in many talks with our colleagues from Multilaterals, from EBRD and IFC and others, with a good talks about what exactly the private sector's needs are and what instruments might be used, starting from the war risk insurance, starting from the direct funding in foreign currency, in local currency, then the grants and the technical assistance as well. From the government side, we also support the private sector. We provide the partial compensations for the high interest rates, well-known 579 program. As well, we do provide the grants for small medium entities and for processing industry, which is crucial for further the economic growth in Ukraine. So in this regards, we are absolutely keen on having very clear mapping with all IFIs and DFIs support, just to understand where the potential overlaps and gaps are, and for further talks to donors and to show the gaps where next, the DFIs might provide support and fill in those gaps.
Great. Thank you, Deputy Minister. Matteo, tell us a little bit about what the EBRD is doing. What are some concrete projects you're working on? And reflect a little bit on what the Deputy Minister had to say.
Okay, let me first say that thank you very much for inviting us, for having me here. And let me also say that I completely agree with the Deputy Minister on the need for the involvement of the private sector in the context of the recovery, the economic recovery of the country. If there is a shift in the position of everybody from last year to this year in the definition of the recovery needs of the country, is the role that the private sector needs to play, which is of absolute importance. Going to the EBRD, well, we've been in Ukraine for 30 years, and Ukraine in the past 4 or 5 years has been either market 2 or 3 for the EBRD. So it's true that we are big in Ukraine, but it's also true that Ukraine is very big in the EBRD.
So Matteo, just for our audience's sake, how much do you guys, before the war, how much were you all investing every year in Ukraine?
About 1 billion euros.
Right, so just so we're clear what we're talking about.
And the competing markets were Turkey and Egypt, which by size clearly have a different order of magnitude. So we got into 2022 with an idea of investing another €1 billion in a number of sectors, in private and public areas. And then the 24th of February happened, and therefore we define a crisis response strategy which articulates on 5 areas. The first one, and the most important one, being energy security. The second one being transport, logistics, and municipal services, what we call vital infrastructure, that has a crucial role in protecting human capital in the country. The third one is food security, entirely in the private sector, and mostly with SMEs and with some champions in that value chain. The fourth one is private sector resilience, and the fifth one is trade finance, so keeping the trade with external partners going. We pledged to invest €3 billion in 2 years. We are getting there. We are at 2.8, 2.9 as we speak. And we are working with IFC and DFC in some transactions, and in particular one that hopefully we're going to sign pretty soon, and which would take us there. But our ambition is not to stop at what we pledged to do at the beginning of the conflict. We are going to go beyond that, and we are preparing a package of interventions in the energy sector. Our president signed 3 memoranda of understanding with Prime Minister Schmigel at the URC in London in July to support Ukrenergo, which already has been heavily supported by us before the barrage of attacks from Russia. So we provided Ukrenergo with liquidity over the summer in 2022. Then we were about to propose a new project because at that point Ukrenergo was a net exporter of energy in Europe. And then we changed completely the nature of the project because of the Russian attacks over autumn and winter of last year. And so we're working with them now for the provision of further liquidity for 200 million euros. We are working with Naftogaz for another line of working capital for acquisition of gas and strategic reserves after the package of 500 million euros that we have provided last year. And we're working with Ukrenergo for a mix of provision of liquidity and repairs in 2 stations above Nova Kakhovka. And then in the private sector, I would like to mention that one because of the multiplier effect it has. Focusing on SMEs in particular, we are working with the financial sector for the provision of risk guarantees to partner banks. So basically, we take away part of the risk that these banks are undertaking in providing finance to SMEs. And I like particularly this product, which is unfunded. So we're not providing money to the banks. We are taking away risk from their balance sheet because, as I mentioned, the multiplier effect it has. For every euro that we put at work, there are 4 euros going into the real economy, and in particular to the SME sector. And if our calculations are correct, and if all we do in the country in the financial sector is brought to fruition by the end of the year, we would have contributed to the deployment of about $500 million in the real economy, which is about, according to the National Bank, 20% of the credit extended to SMEs in the country this year.
Okay, so let me just ask you this, Matteo. So there are a lot of businesses represented in this room who may never have worked with EBRD. If they want to talk to you or talk to someone at EBRD, how do they get a hold of EBRD?
Well, look at our website. My name is there and my email is there. So
You'll be here a little bit. You'll be hanging out a little bit afterwards,
I have
right?
a meeting, actually. I'm sure I'm going to be late for that meeting, but I'm going to be back.
Okay,
and
you'll be
I'm going
back
to be
later.
here anyway tomorrow.
Okay,
of the
so
energy
people
panel,
want to talk to Matteo. He'll be here tomorrow, and I suspect there are people in this audience who've come a long way who are going to want to talk to you. So you'll be here tomorrow. So if you don't see him right after this, talk to him tomorrow. Okay, great. Rana, thanks for being here. Not only are you the largest DFI in the world, but you do some amazing analytical work. I was hoping you might first start with, tell us a little bit about some of the analytical work you've done to look at the role of the private sector and what role the private sector is going to play in the reconstruction of Ukraine. Thanks, Rana.
Thanks, Dan. It's great to be here. And before I do that, I just want to acknowledge a few things. First, it's really great to be here. Secondly, it was really good to see you in Kiev. I've been there twice. And since we're talking about the private sector, I had a chance to see firsthand just the amazing resilience of the people and of the company. So really hats off to all of you. Secondly, I do want to acknowledge the great work that EBRD is doing, really. We talk pretty much all of the time about all potential projects that we're looking at in the private sector, in private sector support. And I think what that says is that all of these institutions are really keen. We really want to engage, and we want to lean in. I'll tell you a little bit about what we've done. IFC's not at the 2 billion mark, but I think three, sorry.
That's a flex, too. That was a flex, Matteo. That was a flex.
Because our program is 2 billion proposed, so that was sticking in my head. Apologies, that wasn't intentional. So we did announce a 2 billion program that we wanted to do to support the private sector in Ukraine. And we wanted to need to de-risk it, so we're working with donors hopefully to raise $1 billion of that, and we deploy $1 billion of our capital. I won't go into why we want to do that, but that's essentially the strategy that we have, and how we want to engage. And we're looking across, and we can only support private sector. Our EBRD colleagues are the ones that work with government entities, so we can only support the private sector. We have, and just to share, it's not $3 billion, but we have we've committed $400 million since that time. And the reason that I mentioned that, and a lot of it is done without blended finance or the de-risking the donor support that we need. Some of the more recent transactions, we were able to do that because we now have some donor money that we can leverage. But the reason that I mentioned that is that we were able to deploy, of course, it is the likes of IFC and EBRD that would come in and put in capital, but still, it is risk capital. We are financial institutions. We have to monitor our balance sheets. We have to allocate capital for every transaction that we do. So there is a risk framework that we approach. Nonetheless, we did deploy capital. We have dispersed a whole range of instruments from short-term to equity to long-term loans. And I think that is if I wanted to send a message, is one that there is vibrancy in the private sector. It is happening. We realize we would be the first going in, but the whole idea is as we go in and demonstrate success, others will come in. And that goes to the multiplier effect that Matteo mentioned, which is absolutely the case. So when you come in and support private sector activities, $1 is not $1 in, $1 out. $1 translates to 2, then 3, then 4. Our average leverage ratio multiplier effect with blended finance, and I'm sure you have the same, it's 1 to 6. We expect early on in Ukraine to do 1 to 3 to 4, but eventually I think we can get to the 1 to 6 ratio. So that just kind of lays sort of how we are engaged. And as I said, we're really collaborating on many deals overlapping in these sectors, which is, from my perspective, a very good thing, because you want to push. You want to push on the trade finance, you want to push on the SME support, you want to push on the real sector support across institutions. Now back to the analytical work. So as was mentioned, the World Bank did the RDNA, was an assessment of the damages and the needs associated with that. So what we've done, because of course we focus on the private sector, so our economists working very close hand in hand with the World Bank said, okay, across all of these sectors that were presented in the RDNA, let's take a look and see how much can the private sector contribute to this. And we did it through a couple of ways. One, we said, okay, as is, without, and I see our chief economist there, right there, thanks, Han, who did all the brilliant work.
Raise your hand.
So raise your hand,
Who's
Han.
that? Where is it?
I think I'm putting him on the spot,
Okay.
sorry. But and we said, okay, as is, how much can the private sector generate or contribute to the RDNA? And that figure is about, of the 411 billion, about 71 billion, right? Or 17%. However, if you do reforms, right? If there are reforms, and we went through each of the different sectors, transport, energy, agri, tourism, and said, if you undertake reforms, how much could that potential grow? And we came to a figure of 140 billion, which is 1/3 of the reconstruction. So, and we're not saying that if you just do reforms, boom, it'll happen, right? You'll have to have de-risk, and this has been the subject of multiple conversations. You'll have to have certain institutions come in, you'll have to de-risk it in some form, you'll have to have different instruments. But, assuming those come into place, and as we're seeing, the discussion is around those coming to place, and it looks like it's happening. If you do these reforms across the sectors, that is the potential. And then if you even go further and say, let's even build back better, that figure could come to 300 billion. So the main message is, the private sector is resilient, it's going to play an important role, and if done right, the opportunity could be multiplied. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Rana. Okay, Christina, thanks for being here. It's a busy day at the White House, I suspect, and and so we really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us. And the United States has been this historic generosity of the United States. We've been providing significant aid through military assistance. We've been providing significant economic assistance, $1 billion a month in budget support. There have been a lot of creative actions taken, for example, financial support for the EBRD with risk sharing. And there's been this new donor platform that has been stood up in the last 12 months. And you support Mike Pyle, who represents the United States on the donor platform. So welcome your reflections on any of this, and thank you for being here.
Yeah, well, thanks, Dan. I mean, I thought I'd start by answering the question that may be in some of your minds, which is why is someone from the National Security Council on this panel? Why is the National Security Council at the White House focused on private sector recovery in Ukraine? And I think the answer is, quite frankly, that when we think about the war and we think about Russia's strategy, it is focused on destroying Ukraine's economy as well as the military, more traditional military targets. It's part of their strategy to try to wear out the support of the West. It's part of their strategy to try to have a collapse in the Ukrainian private sector. So I think when we think about how does the National Security Council, how does the United States need to respond, it's not enough just to concentrate on the security assistance. It's not enough to just concentrate on the humanitarian assistance. We really need to think about how do you create the conditions for Ukraine's economy to survive, and also how do you create the preconditions for Ukraine's economy to thrive later. And so this is something that is fundamental, and I can't emphasize enough, to every conversation that we're having around U.S. strategy in Ukraine, and it's really that ability to provide assistance and the ability to lead others and work with institutions like the IFC, the EBRD, to get that work done is really very central to our strategy. I think many of you may have heard from our new special representative on this topic this morning, Penny Pritzker. I was in New York with her yesterday. I think when we think about how do we do that, how do we get the Ukrainian private sector into recovery mode, it's going to be multifaceted. We sat down with U.S. business leaders. There is in a couple different formats yesterday, myself and Penny. Some of you may have been there. I think I saw some faces in the room. And when we think about it and reflect back, what does private sector tell us needs to happen? I think it's going to be a combination of things, and that's why some of the work that we're doing in the donor coordination platform is really important. Because it's not enough just to have, it's really important to have the instruments that Matteo and Rana were talking about and have that direct support. But we also need to think about, when we asked U.S. private sector participants what was the most important thing for them when it comes to restarting the private sector, they said demining, for example, because the agriculture sector needs that to get farmers back to the field. We heard about needs in the reform space. How do we help Ukraine move through its ambitious reform program in a way that's sequenced and unlocks private investment as fast as possible? And we heard about needs in the infrastructure and energy spaces. And so when we're thinking about a comprehensive strategy to help support the work that EBRD and IFC are doing to directly support the private sector, we're trying to think about motivating not only U.S. assistance, but international assistance to coordinate behind those pieces and make sure that we have a common strategy that brings that together and really then is also provides a place where Ukraine can come and not hear 40 different versions of that priority list. How do we sit down? So the multi-agency donor coordination platform, which probably needs a new name because it doesn't roll off the tongue, is trying to do just that. We're spending a lot of time. We have the Deputy National Security Advisor at the White House. We're going to be joined by Special Representative Pritzker, is also going to be supporting this effort. They're spending a lot of time thinking about how do we get those pieces right? How do we sit down with the other major donors? The U.S. remains the largest donor, but we cannot do this alone, and we need to make sure that we're doing it in a way that's coordinated and leverages the fantastic work of the institutions that are represented on the stage with me.
Great, thank you. So Deputy Minister, I'm sure, are we organizing this as the division of labor? I think the multi-donor platform has been an attempt to try and provide some harmonization so you don't have to respond to 33 different asks of donors. How is that working, and is that working well? And what do you need from the international community? And then I'd say there's also, I think, an adjunct in the development finance space, which has been announced at the URC conference in London, saying smaller aid agencies are going to piggyback, if I can describe it that way, on projects that the IFC or potentially more likely the EBRD are going to put on the table. How's that working? What more needs to happen on the from your partners? If obviously we're being generous, so you can go easy on us. I'm sure don't be too critical, but I do think that would be, I'd be curious about that. And then I think, how is your government thinking about making sure that if they get sort of the same, there's like a harmonized answer across your government? How about that?
Well, yeah, thank you. We are absolutely keen on the absolute coordination from the government of Ukraine, the coordination platform for all joint efforts for Ukraine that are providing from the international community. The multi-donor coordination platform now is focusing mostly on the infrastructure and recovery of the Ukrainian infrastructure, which is absolutely crucial for Ukraine. But also the private sector track is something that we will be looking for as well to have within this multi-donor coordination platform. The same as co-investment platform, which was announced by EBRD recently, and we will be looking for the very in practice talks with smaller DFIs that are now is not presenting in Ukraine. That would be also complementary programs for Ukraine.
Deputy Minister, with all due respect, I mean, these smaller DFIs have lots of balance sheet, but it would be a dumb idea, no offense, to have a bunch of teeny DFIs open up offices, hiring the small number of investment officers, right? It'd be far smarter them to say, let me piggyback on, and this is exactly the point of why we've set up these platforms to say, we want to leverage these balance sheets. We want the British BII, the DFI of the UK government, which has announced that they're going to now operate in Ukraine, to be partnering with EBRD specifically for what you're talking about. Is that right?
Yes, even more, a contribution from small DFIs to so-called trust funds,
right.
For instance, for war risk insurance or other funds that cumulatively will be, leveraging lots of, to have the impact and influence into the...
Yeah, and I say BII. BII is a very generous and very creative DFI. I know there's some representatives of the UK government here, so please don't go back and telegraph back. I say I'm a big fan of BII, but I say smaller compared to, say, the EBRD or the IFC, I think is what we're trying to get at here. So I think let's switch to this issue of insurance. We did 3 meetings on the issue of insurance in the spring in the run-up to the URC meeting, because this was something important at the UK's donor meeting. And my colleague Romina Bendour published an important paper on the insurance issue as it relates to Ukraine. I see some of my friends here in the audience who think about insurance issues. Could you, Deputy Minister, could you just double click, if you will, on this issue of insurance, and maybe my friends from EBRD and IFC could just reflect a little bit, because I know this is sort of insurance means different things to different people in the context of Ukraine. We worked with the AmCham, their representatives here from the AmCham of Ukraine, because at the end of this meeting, I was like, I've heard like 6 different meanings of what the heck insurance means in this meeting. Could we just get like a survey and baseline this? And there's a very important survey, and several insurance companies worked with the AmCham on this, and I encourage people to go to the AmCham Ukraine website to look at that survey. So I think there is an important need for insurance, but insurance means different things to different people. So
right. Yeah, absolutely. We consider on our side that the ecosystem of different tools and possibilities might be in place and might be suitable for Ukraine and for the foreign direct investors and for Ukrainian investors. So we have MEGA case-by-case, contracts, and the trust fund for war risk insurance to provide coverage for investment risks. We have DFC separately, then also for coverage of the investment risk. Then probably new projects from our partners would be also for trading finance, for inland transit goods in transit, inland and maritime. Even more, we have export credit agencies, bilateral, so that they would cover the investments risk on their side.
So you're also working with the export credit agencies
Yes.
as well. It's also part of your responsibility.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in your time as deputy minister, is that going to be one of your areas of focus, is trying to help set up insurance arrangements? Is that something that you're hoping to spend a lot of your time on?
Absolutely, that's the separate track.
Okay, so if
I'm
you're
fully
here, if
engaged
someone's in the room who's interested in insurance, and I know there's several people here, there's several people from ECAs here. They need to speak to the deputy minister while he's here. And you'll be here today and tomorrow, is that right, deputy minister?
Yeah.
Okay, so please find the deputy minister and talk to him about this. Okay, great. So Matteo, if I said insurance, EBRD, discuss, what's your...
A couple of comments on that. The first one is that this is absolutely important and is a tool that we need to have in our backpack, but it is not the panacea in order to attract FDIs in the country.
I agree with that.
And let me elaborate a bit on that, because our anecdotal experience is that FDIs who know Ukraine are actually doubling down already during the conflict. One of the latest transactions we closed in August was with Nestle, that is investing another 25 million euros in the country, moving some production facilities from the east to the, well, of course it's true.
No, I'm looking at, I know it's true, Matteo, but I'm looking at Andy Hunder because he's nodding his head. I'm like, okay, everything you say, I believe. You know that. I'm a big fan of EBRD. You know that, Andy. Matteo.
But the bit about that is again, about this transaction, and is that they're indeed moving some production facilities from the east of the country to the west of the country, but is to expand production because they're going to keep employment also in the east of the country. Another example is, I know that Poland is probably not the most popular country these days.
Right.
However, there is, we signed a transaction in March with Chersanit, the sanitary equipment manufacturing, that was already present in the country. We signed a transaction for over 50 million euros of new investments, out of which half went to Ukraine. So, and they are not looking for war insurance. They're looking for human capital that is there in Ukraine that we need to preserve and defend. And they're looking for structural reforms going forward. And this, I think, is actually the focus.
Okay, so when someone says, I need war insurance, your response is, maybe that's important, but reforms are even more important.
Well, it's certainly much more important. And that means the rule of law, means judicial reform, means anti-corruption, means corporate governance in the public sector, in the state-owned enterprises, state-owned banks, because those account for way more than 50% of the economy in the country, and means at some point privatizations and de-oligarchization.
Okay, yeah.
However,
yes.
I will not escape the question. War insurance is indeed important. We are not equipped as MIGA or DFC to provide that, but as the Deputy Minister was mentioning, we are developing a product for a niche that is completely underserved or not served at all, which is indeed inland transportation in the country.
Love it. Okay. So I'm cognizant of the time. I want to give both Rana and Christina a chance to share any further reflections on the conversation or messages you want to share with this audience. And Rana, if folks want to get in touch with IFC, how do they do that? In addition to going to the website, are there folks here in the audience they can connect with? You can put folks on this, in addition to yourself.
So I was about to feel bad because you've told them to speak to the minister and to the...
Yes. No, I wasn't going to...
You're going to ask people to come talk to me or not?
I'm very equal opportunity. Now, you know I love the IFC. I love the IFC.
So website, myself, there are colleagues here. By all means, I think you know where to find us.
Yeah.
Yeah, please do feel free to reach out. You know, I'm cognizant of time. I would just say exactly, you know, what Matteo mentioned. You know, there are companies that are keen to come in and invest, and they'll want the funding from the likes of IFC and EBRD. I guess I'll just repeat what I had said earlier, and this is something that I've been saying all along. I think right now, you know, especially early on, and there's a lot of discussions about who is doing what, I think you want all institutions to lean in right now. my recommendation and my advice has always been, and my thoughts have always been, leverage every institution that is willing to put capital in to support the private sector right now. The more they come in, the more you have this demonstration effect, the deeper, the broader it is, the more you lay the groundwork for others to come in. And then you start to scale back a little bit. But initially, it will be primarily these institutions. Others will come alongside us, and then eventually others will come in independently, because there's and you've seen from the numbers, the potential in Ukraine is very large, right? So it could go, large or even larger. Having said that, as we talk to companies, there are a lot of companies that are interested to come in. But again, right now, probably they'll just want to partner with us. But hopefully, that'll turn quickly enough. So I think I'll just
Let me just say something about EBRD and IFC. They're bullish on the future of Ukraine. They're voting with their feet. We've just heard about they're collectively putting in $5 billion, over the next while, and investing in Ukraine. And some of it needs insurance, and some of it doesn't. And some of it's and they're doing it now, whether there's a war going on or not. And so you're going to hear from some companies today and tomorrow who are in the category that Matteo was talking about earlier. So I think this is really important. So reforms are an important part of this. And so I think Rana's point about it could go big or really big is really salient. So thank you, Rana, for that. So Christine, I'm going to just give you a chance to just provide some closing thoughts on this conversation.
Sure. I think I'll pick up where you left off. I think it's easy in this conversation to forget that Ukraine actually has enormous economic potential, and we should be seeing it as an opportunity. And I think that's something that Matteo and Rana picked up. But I think just to underscore that, if you look at the fundamentals, Ukraine has tremendous human capital, incredibly tech-savvy population, you have natural resources, you have very rich agricultural land, you have metals and mining, you have the components and a geography that is favorable, and already Ukraine has access to the single market. So as you're thinking about it, the question is, how do we make sure that we use this opportunity to unlock that potential? And how do we support private sector participants, including some of the people in this room, both in making investments that make sense now, that will help to restore hope in Ukraine, but also be smart business decisions given that opportunity. So how do we use the tools of the IFC, the tools of EBRD, DFC is also very much open for business in Ukraine to support that. And then how do we also just lay that groundwork to make sure that we are doing everything we can to make sure that potential is on the big side of Rana's
The bigger side of bigger, right.
So I think the thing that we will be focused on and be really interested in hearing from all of you is to the extent that we have feedback from private sector on how can we best unlock that, both the short-term wins, but also that longer-term potential, and how can we support Ukraine in the reforms that will matter most, the reconstruction and rebuilding efforts that will matter most to unlocking that. That is going to be a huge focus for us, and so interested in having an ongoing conversation with people in this room on exactly how do we get granular, how do we make the changes that support Ukraine in the changes that will make a difference there.
So Christina, if people want to engage with the American government, perhaps one first phone call is perhaps the new special representative's office. Another first phone call might be USAID. They're here in the room. It would be two obvious places that you could start with, right? Is that a...
I think that's great. I think the special representative is particularly focused on being a point person for members of the private sector and also civil society and input on how do we coalesce and how do we make sure that we can have a place for people to send those ideas and a place that can then translate that into action. But of course, please do talk to our colleagues at USAID. DFC also is very interested in and very active in looking at how can it get further involved, how can it be further supportive. So please do reach out to them directly as well. I'm sure that there's somebody from DFC.
Folks. Agnes Deshevitz spoke on one of the panels earlier, the COO.
Great.
So Christine, let me just reflect back on on what I think I heard you say, and say I'll leave you all with this, which is what I said to President Zelensky when I was with him in April, which is, after doing all this work at CSIS, my takeaway is what we want 10 years from now for Ukraine is a full-on member of the European Union, a full-on member of NATO, the ag potential and productivity of Canada, the manufacturing heft of Germany, the tech capacity of Silicon Valley, the defense industrial base of Israel, so they're never messed with ever again, and the GNP per capita of Poland. That, I think, is in sort of the shorthand of how I think about it. So I'm bullish on the future of Ukraine. I think a number of things need to happen. One is that they need to be formally invited to join the European Union. I would hope perhaps next year when we host the NATO conference, we have a clear pathway forward to perhaps some sort of clarity about what sort of a security arrangement Ukraine would have. I would hope they join NATO, but if that's not the case, I think we ought to provide some clarity about that. But I also know that our friends in Ukraine have some work to do, and we're going to be walking with you as you do that. So please join me all in thanking the panelists. Thanks.